All right, so we're going to go ahead and begin. So if you please take your seats, grab some brownies last minute. Hi, my name is Joey. I'm a member of the Dole SAB, Student Advisory Board, and I'd like to welcome you to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's program. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events just like this, and plan an SAB-sponsored program that was just getting compliments that happened last night. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests, and if you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. To view past events, visit our online video archive at www.doleinstitute.org. A video of today's presentation will be available on our website soon. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones before the presentation, and after it, we will have some time for audience question and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will come by with a microphone to help you. Please make it just one brief one. If at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or a student volunteer here in the hall and they can assist you. And finally, I would like to let you all know about a very special program coming up next week. On Thursday, April 10th at 3 p.m., the Dole Institute will present America's Heroes, Medal of Honor recipients from the Civil War to Afghanistan. Author and director of the Military History Department at the Army Command and General Staff College, Dr. James Wilbanks, will discuss Medal of Honor recipients who stood courageous in the face of grave danger and risked or sacrificed their lives for the lives of others. The accounts tell a story of valor and the diversity of ethnicity and culture which broadens our appreciation for these Americans. Several of the Medal of Honor recipients appeared at the Dole Institute dedication, so it's fitting that the originator of our popular Fort Leavenworth series should review some of these courageous stories. And with that, please welcome Dr. Mark Gerges, who will be introducing our guest speaker. Thank you.
I'm also from the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College, and welcome to the third of the Fort Leavenworth lecture series, this one on unknown decisive battles. And it's my honor today to introduce Dr. Richard Barbuto, who's a professor of history and serves as the deputy director of the Command and General Staff's College Department of Military History. He's a 1971 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He served in the Army for 23 years as an armor officer, where he served in Germany, Korea, and in Canada. He was also an exchange instructor at Canadian Forces Command and General Staff College in Toronto. He received his Master's of Arts in a degree in history from Eastern Kentucky University and his PhD from University of Kansas. He specializes in the U.S. Army in the early Republic and the War of 1812, and to just say that and then talk about what he has written is kind of an understatement, because what you're going to get this afternoon is really a recognized a specialist and author in the field. When the U.S. Army was looking to do commemorative pamphlets for the bicentennial of the War of 1812, Rich was asked to do two of the commemorative pamphlets by the Center of Military History. He's authored Niagara 1814, America Invades Canada, as well as numerous other monographs and articles. He's writing a book-length study on New York State and the War of 1812. So, thanks, Barbuto.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I hope everybody had a chance to have a brownie. They're just wonderful. I come for the brownies. There was a time 200 years ago, we remember 9/11, we were attacked by our enemies on our own soil. 200 years ago, not only were we attacked multiple times by our enemy, but they were intent on grabbing our territory, taking it back from us after the American Revolution. That's what we're going to talk about today. The War of 1812 starts with the War of French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, particularly between revolutionary Napoleonic France and Great Britain. France is fighting other enemies. Great Britain is the one we're going to talk about today. They can't come against one another. Britain is sovereign on the seas. France is sovereign on the lands. They can't come to grips, so they launch economic warfare. Napoleon launches a continental system. British goods are not welcome on any port in Europe that's under my control, which was just about all of them. Britain comes back with, fine, nothing is going to get into your ports. So Britain blockades the ports of Europe, but worse than that, they send warships onto the high seas, stopping any cargo on the high seas, heading to Europe to see what it is. In the 10 years leading up to the War of 1812, over 1,000 American vessels, cargo vessels, are stopped, cargoes and ships seized, which is bad enough. But worse than that is that the Royal Navy captain would grab the crew and have them all line up and speak to them. And if they spoke in a British accent, clearly they were born in Great Britain, and therefore they owed their military service to Great Britain, and they were impressed. Impressed is the same as the draft. How many of you saw Master and Commander? A bunch of you. And wasn't that great life on a British warship? Everyone's just singing songs and doing good work, and the weather's usually good, and everyone's having a great time. How many of you saw Ben-Hur? Yeah. Life on a Royal Navy vessel was much closer to being a Roman galley slave. Scholars today say that up to 16,000 sailors serving on American ships, most of them born in Britain but naturalized Americans, some of them born in Britain, jumped ship, not naturalized and carrying false papers, so still British citizens technically, and a bunch who were born in the United States, seized off the ships, thrown on Royal Navy vessels, and had to serve for the duration of the war. So it was pretty nasty business. While all that's going on, American settlers are moving west, Native Americans are pushing back, and when they have conflict, the Americans are finding that the natives are being armed with British weaponry. And therefore, the conclusion that is drawn is that the British are inciting Native Americans to oppose westward expansion, to make war on the settlers as they're moving west. Thomas Jefferson can't solve that problem. He turns it over to President James Madison. Madison brings all this evidence that I've shared with you to Congress, and in a matter of days, Congress declares war. And here are the war goals. This is our first foreign war. It is the first war conducted under the United States Constitution. Madison wants to force Britain to respect our neutral shipping rights, enter whatever port we want, carry whatever cargo we want, to stop impressing our sailors, and to stop inciting the Indians. Now, we can't come to grips with the Royal Navy on the seas. We just can't do it. We've got 6 frigates, they've got 600, okay? What we can do is seize Canada. So the plan is we will seize Canada and offer it back to Britain. If you give us those 3 things, you'll get Canada back. If you don't, we're keeping Canada. For 2 years, we launched a total of 11 raids, major raids and invasions of Canada. One of them is partially successful. They're beating us back at every turn. It is humiliating. 2 years later, Napoleon's defeated. Britain's greatest soldier, the Duke of Wellington, is called to Britain and asked for his opinion on how to conduct war against America. Napoleon's gone. Britain's got 40 or 50,000 trained, experienced troops, hundreds of war vessels, sitting around doing nothing. What Britain wants to do is go back into America and punish America for having the effrontery of starting the war and securing Canada by taking as much of American territory as they can. And Wellington gives his best advice. If you want to do that, you have to control the Great Lakes and the rivers. You have to control the water. The roads are lousy. If you want to move men and equipment and food, you have to put it on ships, and therefore you have to control the Great Lakes. And if you can't do that, get out of the war. If you can do that, then you can do what you want to do. So the government in Britain, in the spring of 1814, sends instructions to Sir George Prevost. Prevost is in Quebec City. He's the Governor General of British North America, which is the 4 provinces of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And his orders are, this year, we want you to advance the border southward. We want you to destroy American naval power on Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and Lake Champlain. Prevost has been running a very good defensive war for 2 years. He's given about 20,000 British troops. They're on their way over to Canada to assist him. And he's not sure exactly what to do and how to go about doing it. So he does a mission analysis of it all, and he consults the Royal Navy commander on Lake Ontario, Sir James Yeo. And he says, what we want to do is destroy Sackett's Harbor. Sackett's Harbor is the major American shipbuilding yard, naval yard on Lake Ontario. The American squadron is about the same as the Royal Navy squadron in Kingston. Yeo has been trying to do this for 2 years. But Yeo's building a large vessel, a ship of the line, the largest thing on Lake Ontario. He says, I'm not going to get onto the lake until this ship is built. It's the St. Lawrence. And when will that be? Well, it'll be October. Prevost says, that's too late, I have to go elsewhere. Yeo says, why don't you try it on Lake Champlain and destroy American naval power there in 1814, and in 1815 we'll clear Lake Ontario. So Prevost decides to do that. Here's a close-up now of Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain is the invasion route between Montreal and New York City. It's water most of the way. On Lake Champlain, we have our naval yard at Plattsburgh. We have other naval facilities too, but that's the main one. The Royal Navy Squadron is at Île-aux-Noix on the Richelieu River, and that's the goal, is to take out Plattsburgh, destroy American naval power, maybe occupy Plattsburgh for the winter, and see what happens after that into the following year. America's got about 5,000 soldiers at Plattsburgh. There are 10,000 British soldiers in Montreal. And the Secretary of the Army in Washington, D.C. orders 4,000 of those American troops to march from Plattsburgh all the way to the Niagara River to break the siege of Fort Erie. There's a whole division of American troops surrounded by the British at Fort Erie, and he does not want them to disappear, to be captured. General George Izard, Major General Izard, sends word back to Washington, D.C. The minute I march 4,000 troops away, 10,000 British troops are going to be marching into Plattsburgh. I've got about 1,500 soldiers left, and most of them are convalescents in a hospital. The militia is inexperienced. They might rally to me, but they're not fighters. They're inexperienced. I really don't want to do this, and I don't think you want me to do this. Secretary of the War responds, you have your orders, start marching. Izard takes 4,000 of his best troops, marches to Albany, eventually gets to the Niagara River in October. He puts Alexander Macomb, Brigadier General, in charge of what's left at Plattsburgh. As soon as he leaves, 10,000 British soldiers cross the border, enter New York State, heading for Plattsburgh. For the next 4 days, there's a delaying action every step of the way where the American regulars and some New York militia are opposing the British. They're firing from behind trees and stone walls, or firing a shot, a volley, and then moving back a half mile, then doing it again, and then doing it all the way back to Plattsburgh. The British Army doesn't even break formation. They continue marching along the roads as if nothing is happening. And they pull into Plattsburgh. Most of the people in Plattsburgh have gotten out of town because they know what will happen if they're occupied by the British. Remember that the memory of the American Revolution is very fresh in the minds of these people. You know, Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne in '77 came through this same area. They know what warfare is like, and they don't want to be around it when it happens. So, September 6, 9,000 British soldiers show up in the outskirts of Plattsburgh. Okay, here's a picture of the New York militia. Both images are correct. On the right, you have the farmer who's training with the broom, and the officers are socially upscale. They're upper middle class or upper class, and they can afford the uniforms. The militia soldiers can't. After 2 years of war, the New York militia is still untrained and inexperienced because, according to the Constitution, they don't have to cross a national boundary. You can't order them into Canada. So they're avoiding the fighting. The second view of the New York militia is the guys on the left. These are the folks who have aspirations for social upward mobility. These are the shopkeepers and the lawyers and the plantation owners and the people who have a little bit of money. They form companies of volunteers. They buy their own uniforms. They buy their own horses, their own equipment, their own weapons They train on their own schedule. It's a social organization. These people are looking for upward mobility. Today, these people would all be Rotarians. But in those days, they joined a military unit. They're well-trained but inexperienced. These guys have not fought. Notice the color of their jackets. The American militia on the right, when they finally do deploy into the fight, looking around them and they see these cavalrymen in red jackets, they'd swear that these are British troops, and therefore they send reports, we are being surrounded by the British. The militia that's already kind of skittish says, oh, we don't want that to happen, and they withdraw out of combat. So the New York Dragoons, who are the only cavalrymen wearing red, because the British cavalry wears blue jackets, are mistaken on the battlefield and cause a lot of bad things to happen. I'm going to show you something. You're the first audience ever to see this. I was going through the archives in Washington, and I was going through the Plattsburgh archives, and I came across an actual photograph that was taken between 3 and 6 September in 1814. It was taken by a British combat photographer, and I'm going to show it to you now. You're the first audience ever to see this. Okay, all right. The original photograph was in black and white. I had this one colorized, but this is what Plattsburgh Bay and Plattsburgh look like. It's on a bay, it's sheltered, that's why it's a naval facility. Most of Plattsburgh is north of the Saranac River. There are a few, part of the village is south of it. The 3 squares there are 3 redoubts. They are mounds of dirt. They are hollowed out, a square of dirt surrounded by obstacles with artillery inside. And this is how the Americans are going to defend. The regulars, Macomb has put his regulars into those 3 forts there. The squadron is going to be in Plattsburgh Bay, and that's where the naval battle is going to be fought. So this is, in Crab Island, what Macomb did is he took all of his convalescents and he moved his hospital out of the fort area onto Crab Island to keep the people safe from the battle. Now he also gives them 2 artillery pieces, and they actually get to fight during the naval battle themselves. Okay, here's what Plattsburgh looks like in 1814. It's the capital of the county seat of Clinton County. In those days, 85% of the people did not live in settlements larger than 500 people. 85% are independent farmers. They're out there in the sticks. But the center of their services, if you will, in government are in places like the county seats. So you see what they have there, all these retail and services and whatnot. And Plattsburgh had maybe 1,500 people living there, maybe 1,500 living pretty close to Plattsburgh, and the rest in Clinton County. Notice that they have 2 newspapers. It's amazing how many small towns in America 200 years ago had 2 newspapers, one for each of the 2 political parties. It's like having MSNBC and Fox News in your town. And the rivalries and the political partisanship were every bit as fierce as they are today, maybe more fierce. Well, in those days, they killed their enemies, and I don't think we're doing that today. But other than that, these are real fierce, and the Federalists have opposed the war. A whole lot of people in northern New York are Federalists. Their trade is not south to New York City. In Plattsburgh, their trade is north to Montreal. And when you stop that trade, smuggling is rampant. So the people in northern New York and northern Vermont are moving, they're driving cattle up to the border. They're going to the local tavern, having a drink. When they come back out to where they dropped off the cattle, there's a bag of silver. And that's how they smuggled cattle. The British soldiers, the 10,000 I'm talking about, they were being fed on American beef. Okay, Thomas McDonough, he's the naval commander. He's eventually a master commandant. Delaware was a midshipman. He was on the party that burned the Philadelphia in Tripoli. Remember, the Philadelphia got grounded, and we were trying to get it back, so we decided just to burn it to the water line, and he was on that party too. He's given command at Lake Champlain. He's got almost nothing to work with. with a little bit of money he has, he starts building vessels and he's buying civilian vessels and he's creating a squadron. And in 1813, he's a master commandant. Master and commander in the Royal Navy is the same as master commandant in the U.S. Navy. So it's like commander today, so roughly a lieutenant colonel. And they command vessels. Remember what Nelson said at Trafalgar, England expects every man to perform or to do his duty, and that inspired the British sailors. McDonough's got a riff on that. He doesn't say America expects every seaman to do his duty. He says impressed seamen. He says all your peers, the 15,000 of them that are serving on Royal Navy vessels, guys, this is your chance to strike a blow to get to win this war and to get those guys back. So it resonated with his crews. The other hero of Plattsburgh is Alexander Macomb. This guy is really smart, really competent. He comes from a New York family, but he was born in Detroit. The statues to Macomb are in Detroit. Joins the Army at a very young age. His rise in the U.S. Army in peacetime is meteoric. Typically, if you can finally make captain after 12 years as a lieutenant, you're probably going to end your career as a captain. Maybe a major if somebody likes you. This guy just skyrockets because people recognize how smart and how competent he is. He's an engineer. He's in the first class at West Point. But because he was already commissioned and the other 12 cadets were not, he's not considered West Point's first, he's not considered a graduate of West Point, but he was in the class with the cadets. So he's largely an engineer. In those days, if you're an engineer, you can't command troops. He's called to Washington before the war. He's made the adjutant general. He's the guy signing all the orders and getting people commissioned and sending orders out to people to mobilize the Army, and he really wants a field command. So he gets promoted to full colonel in the artillery. So this is the first time he's commanded a real military unit as opposed to being a technical expert in the Corps of Engineers. He commands his regiment, the 3rd Artillery, very well. They fight as infantry. Some of them man guns, but by and large, he's commanding a regiment of infantrymen. His expertise, again, is recognized, and he's promoted to brigadier general very early in the war, and that's why he's out at Plattsburgh. He's one of the 3 brigadier generals out there. Izard takes 2 of them with him to the west, and he leaves Macomb in charge of everything that's left at Plattsburgh. Okay, Major General Benjamin Moores commands the New York militia in upstate New York. As you can see here, a lot of people in New England moved to that part of New York. They just shifted west for all the business opportunities there were. He's a lieutenant in the Revolution. That's his only military experience. He does have some combat experience. As the war is ending, he moves into Plattsburgh. He's one of the first settlers, becomes very well established, prosperous, not rich, not really wealthy, but prosperous. The people kind of sort of like him, and he is one of the guys that elects James Madison. And I know what you're going to ask next. After the war, did this guy start the painting business? He did not. This is not the Benjamin Moore who started the painting. So just if you had that question, no. There are only 3 major generals in the New York militia, and he's one of them. So he's well thought of in the political system in New York. He's smart and he's competent, but other than being a lieutenant in the Revolution, he's never fired a shot in anger. So his job really is to get the militia onto the battlefield. He's not a battlefield commander, but he does command the respect of the militia, and they respond to that. So that's good. The picture on the right is kind of what a New York militiaman would look like with his staff officers. So they have the gaudy hats and everything like that, and they really dress the part, and he's one of those guys. Okay, this is the Platt House in Plattsburgh, one of the original, maybe the original brick building there. This photograph was taken around the Civil War. Have any of you ever been to Plattsburgh? Okay, have you seen that? Yeah, that house is still there. It kind of sort of looks just like this. Okay. The British show up in Plattsburgh. Most of the people are gone. One of the brigade commanders, Brigadier General Robinson, and his staff officer are looking for a place for the staff to live in the city. They don't live in tents. They commandeer a house and they move into the house. That's just how you did things in those days. So Robinson, his staff officer's ahead of him, and he's galloping up, and he sees this old man sitting on the porch in Plattsburgh. Now, all the other citizens are gone, but he's still there. And the staff officer rides up to him and says, "Old man, who are you?" And General Robinson says, "Well, Lieutenant, you have been well answered." Nonetheless, they move into the house, and Captain Platt stays there. He's the brother of the founder of Plattsburgh. And they have banter every day. The British and him are just kind of joking back and forth. Well, he's not joking. How long they're going to stay there. And, of course, the British are sure they're going to be victorious. And Platt says, "We're going to drive you out of this place." So it was kind of fun banter back and forth, and it was a good relationship. The British soldiers who serve in this campaign, especially the ones that came over from Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula, are in a nation now where the people speak a language similar to them. It's mutually understandable. And they kind of live with the same level of technology that these people would have saw in Britain. Now, yes, it's backward, but it's not real backward. It's all recognizable that these people are kindred spirits, and of course they know the American Revolution and all that. So the British soldiers behave extremely well in northern New York, and the Americans are very appreciative of that. And we're going to see where that ends us after the war is over. Okay, here's another view of Plattsburgh. So we have the peninsula that's occupied. See the three forts there, Fort Brown, Fort Monroe, and Fort Scott, armed by regulars, and the rest of the peninsula is armed. There are batteries in various places. The British roll into town, and they immediately set up these batteries. You can see them marked on the north side of the Saranac. It takes them days, just days, to throw up an earthen wall and to find lumber and to put the lumber down as a gun platform. And as soon as they get the guns mounted, they open up fire on particularly Fort Brown, but the rest of Plattsburgh as well. And the American artillerists, who actually have more and better artillery than the British do, have been firing back. The reports out of there was 4 days of nonstop firing 24/7 between the two sides. While this is going on, what the British did is if they were building a gun battery, they'd bring out 100 to 150 people with shovels to throw up the wall, and they bring 100 or 150 people to guard them while they did it. All the work is done at night, because otherwise they'd be perfect targets for the American artillery. Captain McGlasson, up there on the upper left-hand side, one night he just gets kind of tired about all this. He grabs 50 of his company, 50 soldiers. They know of a place on the Saranac River to wade across, the British don't know about. In the darkness, they wade across the river, lower bayonets, and overwhelm that battery there. Now, it didn't have any guns in it yet, but they were working on it. He drives off all the workers and all the people guarding the battery. And boy, was the British artillery commander peeved the next morning when he realizes that a platoon of troops just forced his people off the site. Now, when McGlasson gets there, there's nothing to destroy, really, so he takes his people back into Plattsburgh, into the peninsula there. But the morale of the Americans after hearing this, because they heard all the noise, in the dark, wondering what's going on, and to get the battle report the next day, their morale just went sky high. I write at the bottom, what happens if the British win the land battle? Now, there's a couple thousand Americans on that little peninsula. Where do they get to go? They're trapped. Every one of them knows it. It's the Alamo. These people realize that if the British come in, there's only one way the Americans are leaving, and that's as POWs, or they're dead. And every one of them understands that. There aren't enough boats to get them out of there, and they wouldn't be able to do it. So the Americans are very determined that they are going to defend this piece of land. And Macomb and his officers inspire all of that. There's an American battery. See the bridge there from Plattsburgh into the sawmill. That's a wooden bridge. The Americans took off the top of it, the roadway off of it, but the wooden superstructure is still there. And the Americans have teenage snipers, American riflemen, up in the sawmill, firing across the river at the British. The British don't have rifles, they're using muskets. They are up in the second floor of the houses along the Saranac, firing at the Americans, day after day after day. Macomb gives the order for his artillery to heat up the shot, red hot, hot shot, fire it into the houses across the river to burn them down so that the British snipers would have no easy perch up high to fire at the Americans. The British soldiers the next day see these fires starting in the houses, and they try to put out the fire, so a British party goes up to the bridge, waving the white flag, have a little parley, and he says, what we would like is a ceasefire long enough for us to douse out the fires in the houses. And the Americans say, we're doing this intentionally. And the British say, oh, I'm sorry. True story. It was at that point there where the British commander realized these Americans are so desperate, they will destroy their own homes that the people are going to have to come back and live in rather than lose this battle. Here's an early view of the battle. This is the bridge we're talking about, the wooden bridge. So we have the Americans on the right, the British on the left, the artillery firing back and forth, and the naval battle going on in Plattsburgh Bay. So that's an early view of what this looked like. In America, this victory was just a godsend to America, and we'll talk about that a little later, why that's the case. And so it became, iconic in America, the Battle of Plattsburgh.
What is the width of that bridge? What distance are we talking about?
Across the river? Oh gosh, less than 100 yards. Yeah. That's a good question. The Battle of Plattsburgh is by and large a naval battle. And there'll be a test, so I hope copy these numbers down. There's two kinds of guns on naval vessels in this day. There's the long guns. This is the gun line on the Constitution. Those are 24-pounders. A lot of the American vessels were armed with heavy, long-barreled guns like this with long range. A lot of the guns are carronades, and that's what you see in the upper right hand. Big muzzle, short barrel. It'll fire a 48-pound iron ball, and if it hits you, it's going to punch right through the side of the ship. But the range is only about maybe 500 yards. So these things are short-range guns, but when they hit, they make a difference. And the size of them is much larger. They have much more momentum hitting a ship than a 24-pounder. I used to know the physics behind it. I forgot that a long time ago. Anyway, but the point of this here is that the Royal Navy, throw weight is if you added the weight of all the shot for every gun and it fired one volley, what would be the weight of that shot? And you can see there that the Royal Navy guns would fire 1,224 pounds of iron at you. Their carronades would fire 922. So they have an advantage at long range. They want to stay away from the Americans. The Americans are just the opposite. The long-range guns are only 779, so they have much less throw weight than the Royal Navy vessels, but their carronades are much more numerous and throw a larger throw weight. And the Navy people understand that what George Downey, the squadron commander, needs to do is to stand off 501 yards from the American vessels so the American carronades can't reach him. He's got the standoff, and he could destroy the American squadron with his long-range guns. All of his officers understand that. His sailors understand that. So and McDonough understands that too. They have almost perfect intelligence on each other's squadrons. They've got spies everywhere. So they understand what each fleet looks like. Gunboats, we talked about gunboats. This is what a gunboat looks like in those days. So it's 50 or 60 people pulling oars, 1 or 2 guns on it. It also has a sail. The advantage of gunboats, even though they only have 2 guns on them, because they're rowed, if the wind is 0, These are the only people moving on the water. The big vessels are there, and they're not moving. And they can't even hardly turn if there's no wind to give them propulsion. These guys can go wherever they want in the bay and fire wherever they want. And these gunboats, the Americans and the British both have them. Some have long guns, some have carronades, some have both. So there's a lot of these vessels involved here. Okay, 11th of September. Now, George Downey takes command on the 1st of September. He has officers and sailors. He does not know who they are. They're at Illinois. His largest boat, a frigate, the Confiance, is the largest vessel in his squadron, but also larger than anything in the American squadron. The Confiance launches on 3 September. It is not ready to sail. They spend the next week bringing on guns and ammunition. The carpenters are on the ship 24/7, fitting it out so that people can fight the vessel. George Prevost, who's accompanying the army in Plattsburgh, and his headquarters is in Plattsburgh, is peppering George Downey at Illinois to come on down. We need both a land and a sea battle going on at the same time if this is going to work. Downey will not be pressured by Prevost. He comes back, I'll go as soon as my final vessel is ready. I'm not going to attack before that time. He sails his squadron down the Richelieu River into Lake Champlain with carpenters still on the Confiance, fixing it and getting it ready to fight. To man the Confiance, he had to grab sailors and officers from all of his ships and pull them on the Confiance to man it. Both squadrons are vastly undermanned. The Royal Navy actually let sailors out of prison if they volunteered to join that crew. So the quality of the sailors isn't good. The Royal Navy officers did not know who their sailors were. The sailors did not have any particular confidence in their officers, but they were all Royal Navy, and that was probably going to be good enough. Finally, there's a wind out of the north. Downey brings the squadron down Lake Champlain. He gets right around Cumberland Head. He hops in a little boat, sails there, pulls out the telescope and counts what he's got, and he sees the American fleet anchored in line across the bay. So he goes back to his vessel, calls his captains together, and they come up with a stratagem. And what Downey tells the people to do is pull in opposite the American ships, and he tells, your boat will go against that boat, and they all understand where they're going to line up. Pull off to the side, drop anchor, and we're going to exchange fire under 500 yards. And to this day, nobody knows why he chose to do a short-range battle when he was at the disadvantage. Nobody knows. Okay, as soon as they get their boats around Cumberland Head, the wind dies. And there is a current in the bay, the water does move, and they describe the wind as light and variable. So the Royal Naval vessels are trying to tack into position, and as soon as they get about 1,100 yards away, the Americans are opening fire on them. What McDonough has done when he anchored all of his vessels, he did two things. They're called springs. He takes the anchor off the back of the boat and runs it up to the front of the boat and drops it. So the cable runs from the front of the boat to the back of the boat. And he does the same on the other side, from the back of the boat to the front of the boat again. These cables are on capstans, so that the sailors walking in a circle can draw the cable together, and the boat will rotate up to 180 degrees. So he has all of his vessels do that. What this means is McDonough says, I'm not going to sail, so all you sailors that are up there on the yardarms and stuff like that, come on down. You're now part of the gun crews. And all the guns on the port side of the vessel aren't going to fight. So all those gun crews can come to the starboard, the right-hand side of the vessel, to man all the guns there. He's not going to move his vessels, and all of his sailors will be serving the guns. And so he can really reduce the manpower that he needs. And I think, we don't know, but I think Downey kind of picked up on what was going on. Downey comes in, it takes a while for his vessels to come online like they do. And they open up an exchange. And interestingly enough, on the second American volley from the frigate Saratoga into the Confiance, the iron ball hits the muzzle of the Royal Navy cannon. That cannon still exists, got a big dent in it. The cannon is forced back, runs over Downey and kills him. The lieutenant in charge of the vessel, the second in command, wants to signal Captain David Pring, who's on another vessel, he's on the Chubb, the Linnet, to tell him, you're now in charge of the squadron. Nobody can find the signal book to tell him what signals to run up to say, I'm not in charge, you are. So it isn't until the end of the battle that Pring understands that he was in charge all the time, he just didn't know it. And the lieutenant was good for kind of this battle, but he certainly wasn't good for commanding a squadron. Now, while they're firing back and forth, and it's a horrendous fire at close range, the Chubb is damaged, it can no longer steer itself, it starts drifting. The Finch at the bottom, the same thing. The current kind of picks it up, it doesn't have enough wind to do anything, it's going to drift away. And same with the Preble. The Preble is under such intense fire from British gunboats that what he does is he just cuts his anchor to get away, to get out of it. It's just, the fire is too intense for him. And that goes on for about an hour. All the while, the land assault that's supposed to be taking place doesn't. The British troops are all ready to go to cross the Saranac River into attack, and they don't get the order to attack until pretty late in the game. So the Royal Navy squadron, Downey's dead, is expecting this land attack to help support them, and it doesn't occur. Okay, one of the shots from the Confiance onto the Saratoga hits a chicken coop, opens it up. A rooster flies up into the rigging of the American vessel, and he's ticked. And he starts crowing nonstop during the battle. And it's tremendously loud with all the cannon fire, but the crew underneath is just tickled that this guy up there is crowing, and it kind of boosts the morale of the American sailors while they're doing this. If you know anything about naval vessels firing, it's not the cannonball that gets you, it's when it hits the oak wall and it causes all the splintering on the back side of the wall, and there's these wooden splinters just going out and causing horrific casualties on both sides. If you're dead, they clear the deck. They pick up the body and they throw it over the side because they have to clear the deck. If you're wounded, if you can crawl, you're crawling down to the bottom of the ship, and hopefully someone is there to cut off your arm or leg or whatever they need to cut off. So that's what's going on. Blood is getting on the deck. They're throwing sand on the deck so that people don't slip on the blood. I mean, it's almost beyond the imagination what this fighting is like. This is a modern-day shot of the Confiance being surrounded by both the Saratoga and the Eagle, and eventually the Confiance is just all but shattered. The Saratoga now has all of its guns on its starboard side have been knocked out. This is what the gun deck might have looked like. It doesn't matter if this is American or British. The American Navy is modeled on the Royal Navy. They dress the same, they look the same, they give the same orders, and that's why these sailors can serve in either Navy, because they're doing the exact same thing. So, but this is what the gun deck might have looked like on the frigates or the brigs. There's 2 frigates, the rest are brigs. Okay, an hour into the fight, now things kind of get ugly. McDonough has lost all of his batteries on the starboard side. He orders the people to the capstans, and they rotate the vessel. And he's got all fresh guns. The lieutenant on the Confiance tries to do the same thing. He gets his officers and his men to bring an anchor up front to drop it. He has men running around in circles trying to pull on the cable to rotate the vessel. And when he gets 90 degrees around, so he's looking straight at the Saratoga, all the guns of the Saratoga, and he's got no guns. Saratoga fires, One of the shots goes right down the center of the ship, kills or wounds the people running the windlass. And they say, we ain't doing this anymore. And they scatter. So now the Confiance is stuck facing into the Saratoga and can't return fire. So the lieutenant strikes his colors. The British gunboats see that and they flee. On Crab Island, where the Finch has there all the American convalescents there, go up there and capture the ship. So they feel pretty good about that. Colors are being struck. The two fleets are so battered that it's over 2 hours later before McDonough can send a party over to the Confiance, which isn't very far away, to accept the surrender of the crews. People are just taking care of the wounded. They know that the battle's over. And word gets back into Plattsburgh. The civilians came back to the city, got up on the high ground to watch this naval battle. And all the sailors who could got to the shore to watch it as well. And the British Army finally gets the word, we've lost the naval battle, and oh, by the way, we're supposed to be attacking. Okay, this is about what we have in Plattsburgh at the time. A bunch of British regulars, a lesser number of American regulars. The militia there shows up, 2,900 people. Most of these are New Yorkers. A lot of them are from Vermont. Now, Vermont's been smuggling for 2 years. The governor of Vermont is a Federalist. He's not supporting the war. The Constitution says nothing about ordering your militia to invade another country. His militia hasn't been called up by the federal government. This happens too fast. So the governor of Vermont sends the word out to his militia commanders on Lake Champlain, I can't order you out, but if you want to form volunteer companies to cross the lake, that's okay with me. And I'm not going to pay them because they're not being officially mobilized. Okay. Hundreds, well over 1,000 of Vermont militia show up at Lake Champlain, and every vessel on the New York side that can crosses the lake, picks up a bunch of Vermont militia, and shuttles them across to New York. They show up on the battlefield. These people are inexperienced, but they're there to fight a fight like when they defeated Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne in '77. They're going to repeat that. Because the British have crossed a line. It's okay if they buy our beef, but they got to do it in Canada. They can't do it in New York. Okay, here's the British plan. British have 3 brigades. 2 brigades are going to make that main attack in the south. The other brigade's going to split up its troops. Some of them are going to show up that bridge in the north. Some of them are going to go to what looks like a ford in the middle of the Saranac. They're going to demonstrate. They're going to draw the Americans in that direction. The 2 brigades in the south actually get to the Saranac River. There's a ford there, Pike's Ford. They climb up the slope on the other side, and the New York and Vermont militia are there for them. And they open up a firefight. And the American militia fires, falls back, fires, falls back. Their orders are to do that, not to defend the river line, but to stay between the British and the 3 forts. And then all of a sudden, an orderly from General Prevost's office gallops up to General Robinson, who's leading this attack, hands him orders to break off the attack and to return to camp. And these troops that have fought under Wellington very successfully and are very used to victory, and they can see those 3 forts in front of them, and they've got ladders and they're ready to go, and they're tasting blood, are being called back. And they are angry about it all. And of course they blame Lieutenant General Prevost. Nonetheless, they obey orders, they retrace their steps, they go back to the British camp. Prevost says, I can't stay now that my naval squadron's destroyed. There aren't enough wagons in New York to resupply you from Montreal. I can't keep you here. We have enough food to get back to Montreal, and that's it. We can't stay here. So that night he orders a retreat. The British Army very surreptitiously withdraws from their positions, and they start the long march back to Montreal. And they are demoralized because they were utterly convinced if they had conducted that attack, they would have won. This isn't the naval battle casualties. These are the casualties on land over the entire campaign. So casualties aren't particularly high considering the number of troops that fought. But notice the desertion there from the British Army. On the way back, that many British soldiers said, I've had enough of the fighting. While I'm in New York, I'm leaving. I can get a job down here. And they do. And so the British have the humiliation of returning to Canada minus 239 people who desert. Some of these people will end up in the U.S. Army. Most of them will go in the hinterland and hire themselves out. After the war, most of them will stay in the United States. I think a few of them will go back to Britain, but I don't know. Very unclear on the numbers. But most of them will stay and eventually settle. Why did the battle turn out the way it did? The British land attack and the sea attack was not synchronized. Had they both come at the same time, or if the land attack had come first, so the land attack destroys the Americans on the peninsula, it's hard to say that McDonough would have stayed in the bay with the Navy on one side and the British Army on the other. He might have tried to get away. So they weren't synchronized attacks. McDonough optimized his defenses in Plattsburgh Bay with those tricks he used. Downey chose a weaker attack plan. He should have stayed off at long range. He came in close quarter fighting. McDonough and Macomb were firm in their resolution that they were going to defend to the last man. That's what they were going to do. And they communicated that with their troops. And if the troops maybe didn't sign up for it, they understand what was expected of them. Prevost, he was not quite so resolute about what he was going to do in New York. Because of this battle, George Prevost, who's the Governor General of British North America, as soon as the war is over, gets recalled to London for an inquiry of why he botched this campaign. Because all those generals and officers were sending letters back to their family, you won't believe what Prevost did. We were this close to winning, and he called us back. Prevost was a very fortunate man in the inquiry. He died before it was conducted, so there's no record of the testimony. Plattsburgh was one of 4 things being attacked in the war. We have the Battle of Bladensburg outside of Washington, D.C., and the British burn Washington, humiliating to the United States of America. We can't even defend our own capital. The British occupy 100 miles of the coast of Maine, and they're going to keep it. And they administer oaths of loyalty to the people up there in Maine who swear their loyalty to the king. And they've gotten that far. They plan on keeping that. Now, you all know that the Battle of New Orleans is going to happen later, but there's a whole bunch of troops heading on their way to the Gulf of Mexico to New Orleans to seize it. So that's another major British offensives in all this. Then September comes. We have the Battle of Plattsburgh. A couple days later, we have the defense of Baltimore and the Star-Spangled Banner. Baltimore is the 4th largest city in the United States, and it survives when it probably shouldn't have. And so that was a glorious victory in Fort McHenry, which you see out front there. And finally, that whole division that was being surrounded at Fort Erie, and the Secretary of the Army was so afraid that they would be destroyed on their own. They break out from Fort Erie and they overturn the siege and go on the offensive on the Niagara River. Izzard finally shows up after the siege is broken. He shows up about 3 weeks later. Okay, I'm here. What can I do for you? So this is a month of miracles, if you will. How many of you have been to Fort McHenry? Okay, do you know that in the daytime when they take down the little flag and put up the big flag, that if you're at Fort McHenry, they will let you do it? It is it's really too cool. I happen to be there and whatnot, and they said, hey, we need some volunteers to pull on the lanyard and bring the flag down and fold it up and change flags and whatnot, and my wife took pictures of me doing that, so it's kind of cool. Anyway, you can do that. I think it's like 9 o'clock in the morning. Kind of neat. There's only a couple places in America where the American flag flies 24/7. Fort McHenry is one of them. Okay. Meanwhile, in Ghent, Belgium, the negotiators get word of all these cool victories that America has in September, And Wellington talks to the government and he says, we lost. This isn't good. If you continue this, it's going to cost you ungodly amounts of money, and we might not win. You didn't do what I told you to do, gain the Great Lakes. Wellington advises the government, call off the war now. We'll withdraw to our side of the border. They'll withdraw to their side of the border, and we'll call it even. So the negotiators come around to that, and on Christmas Eve in 1814, they sign the treaty, status quo ante bellum, which basically means everything goes back to the was before the war, okay? The war's not over. What does the Constitution that James Madison wrote say about treaties? Ratified in the Senate. Parliament ratifies it immediately. They want out of this. It's not until February when the treaty shows up in D.C., Congress calls emergency session, Senate ratifies it, the President that night signs it into effect. So on February 18th, the war is over. What happened between September 1814 and February of 1815? The Battle of New Orleans. So when people say, what's significant about the Battle of New Orleans? It was fought after the war was over. Wrong. The war was ongoing. It was legal. The British didn't do anything that they weren't supposed to do. Only Andy Jackson did it a lot better. This is that wooden bridge is replaced by a stone bridge. So that's the bridge we're talking about in downtown. The view on the bottom, Benson Lossing drew that himself around the American Civil War. That's Fort Brown, closest to the Saranac River. But it gives you some sense of the dirt walls and how large they were. But of course, the whole battlefield was eroded, and now it is part of Plattsburgh. But I want to read the inscription that's on the bridge. In commemoration of the gallantry and successful resistance of the American troops to the repeated attempts of the British Army to cross the bridge over the Saranac River at this point, September 5 through 11, 1814, erected by the faculty and students of the Plattsburgh Normal School, January 1895. Those are the days when you actually commemorated victories. I don't think we've done that since World War II. But they were very proud of that. All those teenage riflemen up in the sawmill, Congress voted them new rifles and made presentations to all those guys. They're probably in their 20s by the time they got them. But Congress wanted to recognize the bravery of those teenage kids up in the sawmill. What happened to McDonough? McDonough's breveted Major General, so he's a young brigadier, and now he's a brevet Major General. Eventually, he will be promoted to Major General, and he is the commanding general of the United States Army. He's the top guy, like the Chief of Staff of the Army, from 28 to 41. And this is a bad time for the Army. The Army's down to 7,000 people, but he guides it through all of that, and he gives really good leadership, if you will. And there's his statue in Detroit. What happens to Thomas McDonough? Both of these guys get gold medals from Congress, and they're really cool, because they would do that in those days. He's promoted to captain. He continues to serve. He commands ships. He commands squadron. Gets tuberculosis. Tuberculosis was a huge killer in the 19th century. There was no way out of it. Once you got it, you were a goner. And it took years for you to slowly deteriorate until you finally died. And people recognized it for what it was. It was a death sentence. And he's in the Mediterranean commanding a ship. When he's on his last legs, and he wants to get back to America to die. And so they put him on a fast vessel back to the United States, and as he's passing the Straits of Gibraltar, he passes away. And that's his monument in Plattsburgh. That's a McDonough monument in Plattsburgh. Well, thank you all very much. Yes, please. Oh, I'm sorry, there we go.
Did what was going on in the spring in Buffalo and Black Rock have any effect on the positioning of the British troops coming to Plattsburgh?
The British showed up with, those reinforcements showed up, were in 4 brigades. Prevost sent one of those brigades to Kingston to give to General Drummond to add to his forces at the siege of Fort Erie. And the other 3 brigades did this. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so he was doubling the ante on the Niagara. And those guys showed up and they were good. They did fine.
I had a question about the British regulars in the Army. Isn't it true that when they took the King's shilling, a lot of these poor sods out of the cities and all, that they were basically enlisting for life, weren't they?
I'll call on my expert here, Mark.
Typically, it's a 15-year enlistment at that time period, but because of the harsh conditions, particularly if your regiment happens to be stationed in something like the Caribbean, they don't come back.
Yeah, it's a lifetime for those guys. Yeah, it's a hard life, and then you go through America and you look around and say, I could settle here. Yeah. Yes, please.
Did the teenage snipers on the American side have an advantage with rifles as opposed to the British muskets?
Yeah, no, very insightful. A rifle much more accurate than a musket, especially at these ranges here. The musket's firing, 50, 60 meters across the river, house to house and whatnot. It has the range, it doesn't have the accuracy. We don't have any statistics of what the casualties were on either side. All I know is Macomb was glad he had them because it kind of kept the British away from the bridge so they can't come in the night and lay down a new roadbed or anything like that. So they served a valuable service, but yes, and the rifles were probably the reason why. Yes, please.
Are you going to be going to Plattsburgh this summer for some of the celebrations?
No, I'll tell you where I am going. In June, Macomb, Illinois, which is named after Alexander Macomb, has their big Heritage Day ceremony. And so I'll be going there to give this presentation and one other. So that's where I'll be this summer. Yeah, but I'm not going to get up to Plattsburgh. There's a bunch of experts up in Plattsburgh who probably wouldn't be happy if I showed up on their doorstep.
Have you been to the Maritime Museum in Vermont?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you would just love it.
Is that where, in Burlington or in?
No, it's south of there, at Basin Harbor,
Okay,
by Virgin's, where there's
Virgin.
a huge monument to McDonough.
Yeah.
And, but if you go south, you go right on a lake, and they have the replica of the gunboat Philadelphia that they built. It's really
And I guess there's one keel that has been preserved, but I'm not sure what that was from.
Well, they brought up the Philadelphia, and but then they realized when they bring these boats up that they deteriorate so quickly.
All the cellulose is gone from the wood, yeah.
They sailed it all over, and you would totally love it. I mean, anybody does it, whether they're interested in boats or war or history or anything. It's just
Hey, I'm an Army
interesting
guy.
for everybody. Yeah,
Okay,
really great. You would
Yep.
love it.
thank you. Sir?
Could you comment on the friction between Prevost and the High Command and the British regulars and the,
During this command or throughout?
coming up, we'll say to Plattsburgh, Prevost just really
When
screwed up.
Wellington ran his army in the Iberian Peninsula, he kind of didn't care what your uniform looked like. You had to have a serviceable weapon, a sharp bayonet, and a pack full of bullets, and a serviceable canteen, and he didn't care what you wore. So about 2/3 of the British soldiers making this attack are from his army. When they show up in Montreal, and Prevost takes a look at the officers walking around practically dressed as civilians, and the troops kind of sort of wearing whatever they brought with them from Spain, he does not want them infecting his troops with these slovenly habits, and he writes an order to the whole army telling them to buck up their appearance. And the officers who served with Wellington are just incensed at this, that somehow it was good enough for the Duke of Wellington, but it's not good for this two-bit, who the hell are you, George Prevost? They got off on the wrong foot immediately. And so when the attack was called off, it was preordained. that the British brigadiers and the troops that had fought in Spain were just going to, again, be incensed at the decision. So the commands, the other thing that was wrong in the command structure is the brigade commanders and brigade staffs were these regulars who were very well-trained and fought a war very successfully. The division staff are the British officers who had served in Canada for years, and they weren't very good staff officers. So the brigade commanders would expect routes to be scouted out, crossing sites to be identified, food to show up on time, and the division staff couldn't make that happen. And so a lot of these guys from the Peninsular Army said, what kind of a route step unit have I joined? These guys don't know how to conduct war. So you had that tremendous tension that plays out in the campaign.
You mentioned that Macomb was named after the
Macomb, Illinois?
yeah.
Yeah.
Was he from that area or
No.
just from Illinois?
Not at all. His family's from New York, and his family was fairly prosperous. They're in the fur trade. He's born out in Detroit. His political connections are in New York. I don't know why they named him that. Macomb has, I don't know, a dozen children or something like that. The next one who's born, he names him Saranac. It's a good thing they weren't on the Guadalupe River. I don't know, just. And a boy.
What would the repercussions have been if the British had taken Plattsburgh?
I'm sorry, what?
What would the repercussions have been if the British had taken Plattsburgh, if they had taken over the fort?
Yeah, they would have destroyed the naval yard. They would have burned all the public buildings, which means everything that had ever gone into public service. All the wharves, all the warehouses, any boats they found there, all the forts, and they would have marched the troops into POWs, in POW status, back to Montreal. From Montreal, they would go to Halifax. And can you imagine how cold it is in the winter in Halifax? So that's what would have happened there. I don't know, would James Madison, if he would have survived the burning of Washington and the loss of Plattsburgh and the loss of Baltimore, I mean, wherever Congress was when it was all over, I think James Madison's presidential career would have been over. Yeah, it was sad. And the border would have been brought down to at least Plattsburgh. The actual plan was that America would own no land on any of the Great Lakes, that the border would have been pushed south of the Great Lakes, that the Michigan territory, the old Northwest, would be taken away from the United States and made a neutral Indian state bordering between British North America and the United States. And the British would have guaranteed the sovereignty of that Indian nation. That was all in the books. So between Baltimore, New Orleans, and Plattsburgh, that didn't happen. Yes, please.
You had to make a subjective judgment about the win-loss tie record of the war. Where would you come down on?
There's a saying that the happiest people are the Americans because after the war they were told that they won it because of the Battle of New Orleans. Because when the news of the Battle of New Orleans reaches the East Coast, late in January, a couple weeks later, the treaty shows up. And American newsmen, journalists at the time, and the people made the connection. We win New Orleans, we have a peace treaty. We didn't lose any territory, therefore we won the war. So the Americans are happy because they think they won the war. The Canadians are happier still because they know that they won the war. The War of 1812 is their American Revolution. They're celebrating it big time for the past 2 years. The happiest of all are the British because they don't even know that the war existed. So, no, this is a tie. At best, it's a tie. We got out with our skins and that's it. I mean, it's just like, oh, glad we dodged a bullet there.
A follow-up on that question, what about the Native Americans, every which direction? And
Yeah.
I mean, where did they come down, but what ramification on them as a result of this?
To this day, 200 years later, scholars do not know who won the War of 1812, but we are all in agreement of who lost it. The Native Americans lost that war. Tecumseh and his confederation was destroyed in 1813. There are still lingering pockets of resistance, but once the war's over, and the Creeks, the Red Sticks in Alabama, they had their uprising. Jackson put them down brutally. So the Native Americans said that uprisings is not, we're going to have to accommodate with these people because there's no way we can challenge them militarily. And it's not until Black Hawk has a small uprising, which is a spin-off of this war, even though it's, 18 years later. And that's kind of the last time that the Indians in the central part of the United States can militarily challenge the United States. After that, it's the Plains Indians who pick up the fight. Yeah, but it was bad news for the Native Americans, just utterly bad news for them. And as you probably know, Jackson had Friendly Creek Indians fight the Red Sticks in the South. And after the war is over, he writes the treaty, and he takes away half of Creek land to include the land from the Friendly Creeks. So the Creeks allied with Jackson in the hopes of being on the winning side. They were, and it didn't matter. Yeah, these were not good times. Yes, please.
Sometimes say tongue-in-cheek that basically the support that the Congress and people with money showed in the American Revolution and in the War of 1812, that the Revolution was a war we deserved to lose but won, and 1812 was a war we deserved to win but lost.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, that's probably a good point. You shouldn't start a war that you haven't thought through, that you don't know how it's going to end, that you're going to finish. I mean, don't take that first step unless you've thought your way through to the last step. And in 1812, we didn't do that, but we did put a lot of money into the Navy, into the Army to raise the troops. We did. We started too late to make a difference. They didn't start expanding the Army until January of 1812, declared war in June. 5 months is not long enough to raise an army, get officers there, get it trained, and put it on the road to Montreal. It was never enough time. But Madison thought it would be okay. Thomas Jefferson thought it was a great idea in his correspondence with Madison. Thomas Jefferson says, we're probably going to lose some of the opening battles. He says, but our best guys are going to rise to the top because we're a meritocracy. And in 1813, we're going to have replaced the generals and our army will be experienced and we're going to win. And moreover, we will incite a revolution in Great Britain because the poor commoners there will see what we're doing. And they're going to rise up against their British masters. And of course, that didn't happen. So it's like Jefferson, as brilliant as he was, did not have his fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the world. He miscalled that, and I think between him and Madison, they're both, they did not think this one through. And they're both my heroes, but they didn't think this one through. Sir. Ain't going there. But yes, I mean, Clausewitz tells us, and every strategist will tell you the same thing. Don't take the first step unless you know what the last step's going to look like. And I got it that there's friction and there's chance and all those other things occur. But if you haven't thought this one out, from top to bottom and back again, if you haven't walked the dog the entire trip, don't even take the first step. You're not going to like what comes out the other end.
Elaborate more about what this war meant to the Canadians, because I don't, for one, have a good understanding of, Canadian history.
In Canada, and I lived there for 2 years, and I know a lot of Canadian officers. The myth in Canada, and their scholars call it a myth too, they recognize it. In Canada, for 200 years in the schools, their children were taught that it was the Canadian militia with a couple British regulars who came over to help out. It was the Canadian militia that defended Canada and threw the Americans back across to their side of the border, 11 times during the course of 2.5 years. That's what they were taught. And all the military scholars, even in Canada, say, well, that's really a myth. And they try to kind of change minds, but that's a mind that does not want to be changed. They're very comfortable with that. It's like in Tecumseh, there's 4 heroes in Canada from the war. Laura Secord, who does start the chocolate, no, she doesn't start the chocolate company. Laura Secord, Tecumseh, let's see, Isaac Brock, who we kill at Queenston, and who's the fourth one? They've got, let's see, a Native American, a female, a military guy. I forget who their fourth hero is. But they chose their heroes based on a cross-section of their population. And they appear on the stamps and in the lectures and in all the history books that were taught in school for decades.
How did things change for them in Canada? Did it make, what kind of an impact? I mean, did British, did they see how they saw themselves differently and how Britain saw Canada differently?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, Britain during the 1830s and 1840s came to the realization that there was no way they could defend Canada against the United States, which is one of the major reasons why Confederation occurred in, 1867, I guess? It's like, it looks like we're granting you your independence. What we're really saying is, defend yourself, we can't do it. And the Canadians, they knew what was going on, that they were on their own. But they built the Rideau Canal, so they weren't sharing a water border with the United States. They built the Welland Canal for the same reason. We had an agreement to demilitarize the Great Lakes, which was really good for both sides. And after a while, trade picks up. The British burned every house except one along the Niagara River, 37 miles of it. They burned down in December of 1813. Every house burned. And they let loose the Indians, who took their share of scalps. It was pretty brutal on the Niagara frontier. And we burned a couple of their towns on the other side of the border too. I mean, it really was tit for tat and whatnot. And that leaves a level of animosity that takes at least a generation to overcome. But they're very proud of the war and their part in it, and they beat off they beat back the Americans, and good for them. Time for brownies? Thank you. Thank you very much.